Welcome back to the Physics of Faith podcast. I'm Tim.
I'm Tommy.
And we're in the Gospel of Mark. So we're hitting the halfway point here as we get to chapter 8. And we're going to dive in here, but we've seen a lot of great things that Jesus has been doing through his ministry, and we're going to see that continue here.
Absolutely.
All right. So starting in chapter 8, verse 1 through 13. In those days, when there was again a large crowd and they had nothing to eat, Jesus summoned his disciples and said to them, I feel compassion for the people because they have remained with me for 3 days already and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance. And his disciples replied to him, Where will anyone be able to find enough bread here in this desolate place to satisfy these people? And he was asking them, How many loaves do you have? And they said, 7. And he directed the people to recline on the ground. And taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks and broke them and started giving them to his disciples to serve. And they served them to the people. They also had a few small fish, and after he had blessed them, he told the disciples to serve these as well. And they ate and were satisfied, and they picked up 7 large baskets full of what was left over of the broken pieces. About 4,000 men were there, and he dismissed them. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and came to the region of Dalmanutha. And the Pharisees came out and began to argue with him, demanding from him a sign from heaven to test him. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, Why does this generation demand a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the other side. All right, so Jesus feeds the 4,000. So I don't know if sometimes we maybe forget that he did this twice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the disciples are a little bit more on board this time.
Yeah, they get it. They've been through it before. They're like, oh, he's doing this again. Okay.
Yeah. We've already counted, God. There's 7 loaves.
We know
Jesus, 7 loaves. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's a holy number too. It's 7.
Yeah.
You know, the first time, it's funny. They had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That's 7. Mm-hmm. They picked up 12 basketfuls after they were done, which is also another number that you see often.
Yeah. Number of disciples.
This time you see they've got 7 loaves.
They've got 7 loaves, but they also had a few small fish. They don't say how many.
Yeah,
fish.
They don't say. Yeah.
And there's 7 baskets left over.
Yep.
And they were with him for 3 days. So so if we get into numerology,
3, 7, 12, 100 or 3, 7, 12, 40. Those are kind of the big numbers.
Right.
If there's a Bible trivia question and the question is a number, or it's probably one of those. So
probably one of those. Yeah.
There you go. If you have a trivia night or somebody asks you, if the answer is a number, it's probably one of those.
Yeah. All right. So this basically the same thing happens. They pass out the food. They have all this food left over, and when they're done, also I want to point out too, Jesus again is moved to do this out of compassion. Mm-hmm. He's often caring for the people that are pursuing him, right?
Yeah. Well, and you also wonder, he's often told people not to tell all this, and they do, and people are forsaking their own health. I mean, they're following around with no food, no water. They're not even taking care of themselves.
Yeah.
But because Jesus is Jesus, he's like, well, we better feed these people.
Yeah. So one of the things that I find really interesting about this too, and I get it, maybe it's because, so they get in the boat and they move down to a different region. And when they get to the other region, here come the Pharisees. And what do they want? They want a sign from heaven.
I know. You have to laugh.
Right? Like, I just fed 4,000 people.
Yeah.
It's the second time I've done this.
Yeah.
I multiplied bread and fish. What else do you want? Now, granted, they're like further down the road.
This is a different region. So,
Also, they ask for a sign from heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So they're probably asking for something specific. They want a pillar of fire or like the giant cloud.
They want a sign straight from God. You did the bread, you did the fish, you walked on the water, you did all that, but we want to hear from God. Right. You claim to be from God. Let's see if you're actually from God.
Right. And that's the thing is he's basically saying it's already clear to you. And okay, so here's the thing that I find interesting. He says, "Why does this generation demand a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." And he leaves them. At the same time, signs are happening everywhere he goes.
Yeah.
I don't think the point is that he won't give them a sign. He won't give them the sign that they want.
They want it on their terms. They want proof for themselves. They want it their way, not just to see it and to have the faith and accept it that what Jesus has done and says is the truth.
As long as they choose to ignore the signs that are there, it will be as if no sign has ever been given.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he's getting at here, because the Pharisees are like, no, play our game.
Yeah.
Play our game. And you don't get to go to God on your terms.
Yeah.
He's issued the terms. Thankfully, the terms are easy. The burden is light. Come to know Christ. Accept Christ, and you will be grafted in. Right? That is our lot. That is how we come to God, is through Jesus. He's the way, the truth, and the light, and the only way to the Father is through Him.
Yeah.
And if we do that, if we go to Christ, then all these things are there for us. Right?
Yeah.
But we don't get to say, God, do it my way.
Yeah.
Make this okay for me to do. Do this thing for me, and then I'll come to you. Look, I've heard some powerful testimonies of some people who have tried to bargain with God, and sometimes it actually worked.
Yeah.
But it was because it was within the will of the Lord, and He knew what that outcome was going to be.
Yeah.
So people who say, I need a sign, oftentimes will have a way to explain away the sign when they see it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's
I heard a guy talking at one time, and he was talking about he was dealing with something, and he was like, God, give me a sign. That's a dumb prayer, right? Why would I say that? God, give me a sign. And he said something about, like, he goes off, he sits down on a bench, or he sits down in a bus or something, and this woman comes up and sits next to him and is just crying, and he goes, "Is this a sign? Is this what you mean?"
Oh gosh. Yeah. Second it's there, we're going to second guess it.
Yeah.
All right. So verses 14 through 21. And the disciples had forgotten to take bread and did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. And he was giving orders to them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet comprehend or understand? Do you still have your heart hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, and how many baskets full of broken pieces you picked up?" And they said to him, "Well, 12. When I broke the 7 for the 4,000, and how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up?" And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, "Do you not understand?" This is so great.
Yeah.
I think this is hysterical to me. So, like, earlier in the day, Jesus basically multiplies all this bread.
Yeah.
Now they're back in the boat, and the disciples forgot bread.
there were 7 basketfuls of bread.
Yeah.
People follow him, and so because they have little bread, Jesus multiplies the bread, and they only have 1 loaf of bread.
Yeah, they left it there. And what's even funnier here, so now Jesus has had this conversation with the Pharisees, and so now he's telling his disciples, he's talking about the Pharisees, and he's talking about the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod.
Yeah.
And what's funny about this is, so he's using leaven as an analogy, but leaven is what goes into bread to make it rise, right? So their mind is strictly on the bread, and they're hearing leaven, and they're like, he's
talking about bread.
He's talking about the fact
only
that
have 1 bread. Yeah.
He's rebuking us because we didn't bring bread, right? But what he's talking about is the influence of the Pharisees and the influence of people like Herod, who weasel their way in with doubt and with their desires and get you to question everything you already know to be true.
Yeah, he's thought everything. He's thought ahead of everything.
Yeah.
He knows what all the issues are going to be. He knows how they're going to struggle, and he's preparing them for everything. But he also does it in a way that they have to take. They have their own step. It's a little. They're not exactly sure what he means, and so they have to dive further. And probably after he comes back from dead, they're going to remember this. Like, oh, that's what he meant.
Yeah.
When they're in front of the Pharisees, when they're preaching the gospel, and the people bring them into the front of the Pharisees and Herod and tell them that they need to be punished, like, oh yeah, that's what he meant.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also interesting here. So the disciples are still focused on things that are not important.
Yeah.
They're focused on where are we going to get the bread, and he's like, I am the kingdom of heaven. You're worried about bread.
Yeah.
Like let's think this through. But then he also he makes a statement here. He says, do you still have your hearts hardened? And this is a callback to when he fed the 5,000.
Yeah.
Because it says, if we remember that at the end of that passage, it says they learned nothing and their hearts were hardened, right?
Yeah.
And now he's like, oh, come on. I've done it twice now and you still don't get it?
Yeah.
Are your hearts still hardened?
Yeah.
And so he challenges them this. And then he's like, how many baskets did you pick up? And I love that it's not rhetorical. Like, I love,
Yeah.
I love that they're like, 12?
7.
Yeah. He's like, good. Now, how many is that, class? It wasn't. So he's like, look, don't you get it? Have you not seen what I will do? And again, like, here's the ones who have seen the signs, but they're still not understanding what it means.
But you know what? I'm exactly the same way.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I have prayed and God has answered my prayers, and 30 seconds later, I'm upset about something.
Yeah.
I mean, we give the disciples a hard time because they were there and they see it and they didn't remember. But even in 2024, we still do the same thing. Yeah. I think about, oh, money's tight. And then I think, like, there was a time in my life where, I decided some things about my job and monetarily, and like, okay, how's this going to work? And so I prayed, God, okay, you fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That's kind of the same math we're talking here, because I knew our expenses and I knew what my income was. I'm like, okay, God, this is the same thing we're talking about here. And, even still, I still sometimes worry about things like, whether it be money or things like that. And I forget, oh yeah, he has always provided,
Yeah, he absolutely has. We have to not forget that. We have to recognize what he has done as we move forward.
Maybe not the way I wanted it,
right?
But the way that his way.
No, I want to check, and sometimes sometimes that's not how he's moving.
Right.
Like, I want to check so I can cash it and buy Chipotle. Right. But he's like, but I have a neighbor who made you lasagna. It's like, yeah, but it wasn't very good lasagna. Like, well, God, you're not blessing me the way I want to be blessed. Give me a burrito, please.
Right.
So this is, but you make it's such a great point though. Like, it's easy to be critical of the disciples of what we would have been doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And there's so many, we say, man, if God would just talk this way or do this thing, then I would totally get it and I would be sold out and I would never forget. And we forget what he did for the people of Israel and how quickly they turned against him.
Yeah.
Like within days of hearing his voice, they built an altar to something else.
Yeah.
So we might not want to think of ourselves too highly.
Yeah. So we can, so yeah, there's 2 ways of looking at that. We shouldn't criticize because we do the same thing. But at the same time, we can take a little heart sometimes in our unbelief because it was way clear for them, and even they struggled. So again, that doesn't give us like, that's okay if you don't believe that, But it's a reminder that we are never going to be enough, and we can't ever do enough.
Right.
It is always going to come back to our faith in Christ and Him providing for us and God providing for us, not on our own accord.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's jump down to 22 through 26. And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a man who was blind to Jesus and begged him to touch him. Taking the man who was blind by the hand, he brought him out of the village, and after spitting in his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people, for I see them like trees walking around." Then again he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently, and was restored, and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." All right. So again, Jesus is asked to heal somebody. This person is blind. And again, like the deaf man, he takes him kind of out of the village,
Yeah.
takes him away, and again does some weird things.
Yeah. Kind of gross.
Kind of gross. Spits in his eyes.
Yeah.
And then I see him like a doctor. He spits in his eyes. He's like, okay, now what's better?
Yeah.
One or
Do you
two?
like number 1 or number 2?
Number 2.
Which is better?
Because he's seeing things, but they're not in focus.
Yeah.
And then so he lays his hands on him again, and now the man can see intently. He looks intently is what it says.
Yeah.
And now he can make out. Oh, that's not a tree. That's Tommy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier how Jesus never does the same thing twice, and I think I really like this story, and because it's the first time that Jesus doesn't do everything right away. He's going to heal this man's sight, and so he spits and he does this. He goes, "Okay, how about now?" He's like, "Well, I can see things, but I'm not. There's something. It's not quite this." It's like, "All right, let's try again." Yeah. And Jesus goes back and he tries again. And I wonder, and I wrote this down in my notes. I wonder if everything Jesus did was on purpose and for a reason. And there's part of me that wonders, like, okay, why would he do it like that? Was that a test of the man's faith to see, like, all right, will you heal me, Jesus? And he does this. He's like, it's not all the way. And he's like, nope, he didn't do it. Dang it, Jesus, you didn't heal my sight. He said, well, it's better. I can't see fully, but I can see some things. He says, okay, let's try again.
It's almost like he shows himself to be grateful for what he gets. And, and there's something we said there, like Jesus didn't fail the first time.
Right, exactly.
I think that's important to note. And that's what you were saying there is, I wonder, so you say, I wonder if it's a test. I'm also wondering, is it about growing his faith?
Yeah.
So the man has faith, but not a lot of faith. So
Yeah.
he says, okay, what if I show you this
Yeah.
in accordance to your faith? Now his faith is building. Oh,
Yeah.
you took me from 0 to a 5. Now get me from a 5 to a 10. Now I know I can get to a 10 because you've already shown me this, right?
Yeah, and I also think it's a good reminder that not everything happens right away. There is a process. How often do we pray and we ask God for things, and we kind of does it. He does it, but he doesn't do it all right away. He doesn't do it the first week. It's week 1, it's a little bit better. And then week 2, it's a little bit better. And then week 3, and then week 4. But all that time, we still have to keep praying and still keeping the faith that eventually it will be fulfilled.
And that's a theme that has kind of come up a couple times for us, is that God has done many things gradually.
Yeah.
He doesn't thrust us into fullness.
Yeah.
He gets us to a place where we can be in fullness.
Yeah.
So it reminds me, we did an episode a while back with Ethan when we read the book, The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis makes a quote in there where he says, God so loved us that he essentially set out to make us lovable.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that he wasn't able to love us. He did love us, but we weren't able to receive his love, right? And to understand the depth of his love. And we don't necessarily have any of the characteristics that anyone should love.
Yeah.
And so because he loves us, he is gradually making us more lovable. Because he is wanting what's best for us, he's consistently evolving us and getting us to the place where we can walk in his fullness.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So now we're going to jump down to 27 through 38, and we're going to see some pretty big revelation here for the disciples. Verse 27. Jesus went out along with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he questioned his disciples, saying to them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, saying, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And he continued questioning them, "But who do you say I am?" And Peter answered and said to him, "You are the Christ." And he warned them to tell no one about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise from the dead. and he was stating the matter plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's purposes, but on man's." And he summoned the crowd together with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it benefit a person to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what could a person give up in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes to the glory of his Father with the holy angels." All right, so
Boom.
powerful mic drop outro there. All right, so as they're walking along, Jesus is asking the disciples, "So what do people say about me?" And this is kind of mirroring what we heard when we look back at Herod putting John the Baptist to death. Was people were saying he's John the Baptist risen, or he's Elijah come back, or he's one of the prophets. So people had a lot of theories about who Jesus was.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love this passage because there are answers to questions that we've, as we've recorded this podcast, there are answers to questions that we've been asking right here, in previous podcasts. Because to this point, Jesus hasn't really said to the people that he is the Christ and the Messiah. He's taught. He's gone around. He's taught. He's spoke with authority, as they've said. He's healed. He brought back the dead. He's healed the blind. He's healed the leprosy. He's cast out demons. He's done all these things. But at least it's not recorded that he says, "I am the Messiah" to all of these people. Right. The disciples are the only people he's told this to. And, we've been asking, okay, well, why does he make it so complicated? Why doesn't he just say to the disciples this? And why doesn't he just do this? And why does he tell people not to tell him? This is why. Because he says, "I am the Messiah. I'm going to die, and I'm going to be risen back." And Peter rebukes him.
Yeah.
And Jesus has to say, "Get behind me, Satan."
Yeah.
I mean, imagine if he had done that, obviously, the first time, Peter probably never would have followed him,
Yeah.
And then he, at the end, he, and I know I'm kind of jumping ahead, so there's probably other things you want to add to this, but, he called the crowd together. He says, "This is what it takes to follow me."
Yeah.
And, this is several times then that this is what it means to follow me, and he's waited up until now because probably if he had said it before, when he said to Peter, "Come follow me," and he got and followed me. He said, if he had said, "Follow me, I'm going to die, I'm going to come back from the dead, and then you have to take up your cross to follow me because you're going to do the same thing."
Right.
He wouldn't have followed him at that point.
No, in fact, later on when he does come back and he's telling Peter what's going to happen, Peter's not really happy about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but this is a fantastic point, and I love this. So Peter's the one who even points it out. You're the Christ, right?
Yeah.
But it illustrates that he didn't understand what that means.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Because he's telling him this is what's going to happen, and it says that he said it plainly as well.
Yeah.
I get this image. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. I get this image of like Peter pulling him aside. "Now, teacher, like good stuff. You're doing good stuff. You're saying good things. Get it. But maybe that last message was a bit off point, right? Like, you don't want these people thinking that you're going to die because obviously you're not going to die." And Jesus' response is, "Get behind me, Satan."
Yeah.
He's like, "Look, you don't get to rebuke the Son of God."
Yeah.
Right? In fact, I have to rebuke you now because your intent is, and your purpose is for you.
Yeah.
This is a selfish desire to not see this happen. You don't want to see me die, and you don't want to die as well. You want God to do it differently.
Yeah.
And you only want that because you don't care about what needs to be done. You care about what you want to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He says, but we have to set our mind on God's purposes. And then what's interesting then is he grabs that crowd together, and something that jumps out to me is he says, "Anyone who wants to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." I'm wondering right now in this moment, did he tell the disciples he would be crucified, or did he tell them he would be killed?
Yeah.
Right? And is this the first that we're hearing the mention of the cross? And also, he's saying this to more than just his disciples, who he just talked plainly to.
Right.
So he's referencing the cross before anybody knows that he's going on the cross.
Right.
And I think that that's a really telling thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is one of those scriptures that I think people often kind of misquote and misuse. You hear often people say, that's my cross to bear, or that's my cross that I have to carry, and they say that in reference to a family member who is an alcoholic, or something that a problem that they just have to deal with, and that's my cross to bear, and what that really means is, at the time, the cross was death. And when Jesus died on the cross, he carried his cross. He carried the weapon of execution to his own execution.
Yeah.
And so what Jesus is saying here is, to follow me means to die to yourself.
Yes.
You put away every want, every desire, every selfish thing that you want for yourself to follow me. That's what it costs to follow me.
Exactly. You have to be less concerned with what you want and more concerned with the gospel.
Yeah.
And it's great. And then that's where he gets to this very famous passage. What does it benefit a person to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul? What could a person give in exchange for his soul? Right. So, I mean, this is such a great passage, and it's I've heard it in songs, and there's but what is he saying here is like, when you pursue your purposes, when you pursue your desires, when you strive to save your life, you lose everything.
Yeah.
Right. But when you lay it all down for the sake of the gospel, you have gained everything.
Yeah.
Because it's only in the gospel and it's only in Christ that you have life. Right.
Yeah.
So it's hard for us because we see the finite, we see the natural, we see the hardship and the pain and the death of it.
Mm-hmm.
And he sees the victory on the other side of it.
Yeah. Yeah. You were talking about something I was thinking as you said that, if you do these things, if you do all of this stuff for yourself, and obviously you're going to die and you're going to lose it all. If you search after money and things and houses and all of these things, eventually we're all going to die and you're going to lose it all anyway, But if you lay those down, if you willingly give those up, you're not losing them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we go back to the story of Herod.
You can't lose something that you never had or you never cared about.
Right, exactly. Yeah. We go back to the story of Herod, and that was why he couldn't repent, because he couldn't let go of everything that he had, his reputation or his desires or all those things. We go back to the Pharisees. They couldn't let go of their traditions and their authority and their power. Mm-hmm. And here Peter couldn't let go of his own life, and he couldn't let go of the life of Christ. He didn't want Jesus to die, right?
Yeah.
And this was not the end, and Jesus understood that.
I'm skipping ahead because I haven't checked this yet, and it doesn't look like him. But there's the story where the rich man comes to Jesus and says, "What do I have to do to follow you? Do this, and do this." Well, I've already done that. He says, "Okay, now give it all up and follow me."
Yeah.
I wonder if, because we haven't talked about it in Mark yet, and flipping through Mark, I didn't see it ahead, so I don't think Mark brings that up.
We'll see it if we do.
Yeah. But I wonder if this is happening at that same time. You know what I mean? Not that it's the same story, but it's
thematically it's the same.
Yeah, he's saying the same thing there that he's saying here. So I wonder if this is just the telling is a little bit differently.
It's almost as if the things that Jesus taught were consistent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's things that not all four gospels have. They all say the same thing. They don't disagree, but they don't. There's some things that are in Matthew and Luke that aren't in John. There are things that aren't in Mark that are in other. And so that story. I know I probably should have known that before we record this conversation. If this is ahead.
It hits you in the moment, but
yeah, well, yeah, it is. But yeah, you think about the life of Jesus, and all these things really happened, and they happened roughly in this order, and most of the Gospels record them in the same order. But some things, some Gospels don't talk about. So I wonder if this is kind of at that same point in time.
Good question. I bet we could find out.
Yeah.
Maybe if you know out there, put it in the comments. I think it's important to note, though, the Gospels aren't contradictory; they're complementary.
Yeah, for sure.
And because one says one thing and one doesn't say it, doesn't mean it didn't happen. That's an argument from silence. It means that from this perspective and for this purpose, it was important to record.
Yeah.
And from this perspective and this purpose, it wasn't. But we see these things; they do overlap.
Yeah.
So,
well, and really in Mark, this is really like Jesus turns up the volume here. He
does.
To this point, he's talked a little bit about watch out for the Pharisees and Herod, and he's taught the disciples all these things. But this is the first time he's really talking. This is the first time he predicts his death to them. He really goes into how much. He says he speaks plainly. So he's talked about it a little bit. He's referenced it, but they didn't get what he meant.
Yeah.
Now he's saying, this is it.
Yeah.
This is what this all means.
Absolutely. He's got them to this point where he can say, this is specifically what is going to happen. And then in verse 38, he says something that could be perceived as harsh, but I think is really important, which is, for whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes to the glory of his Father with the holy angels. And ultimately, this is kind of a foretelling of, if you have rejected Christ, he will reject you.
Yep.
It is only through him that you get to the Father. So when you get to the gates, when it's all said and done and you're standing before judgment, will Jesus be your advocate or not?
Yeah.
And the only way to have him as your advocate is to accept him as who he is, which is the Messiah, and the only way to the Father. But if you've said, no, I'm ashamed of that, then he'll be ashamed of you because you've rejected him at that point. Yeah,
I think it's in Matthew where Jesus says, many will say on that day, many will say, Lord, Lord, and I'll say, depart from me, I never knew you.
Never knew you.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what a way to end chapter 8.
Well, yeah, right in the middle of the thought.
Oh, gosh, you love chapters. So when we come back, we'll be back with chapter 9, which will get us into some really cool stuff. I'm looking forward to getting to that. But thanks so much for continuing this journey with us. Again, let us know in the comments what you think. Let us know how your journey is going with the book of Mark, and we hope to see you next time.